everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is proud to present today's program about a Japanese Gagaku music manuscript as part of the Fowler's Lunch and Learn series, which offers easily digestible explorations of charismatic objects from around the world. We're so pleased that you've joined us to chew on some sustenance and feed your mind and soul. Japan is a culture of strong contrasts. Rapid advances in technology are balanced with the careful preservation of traditions in music, dance, theater, painting, sculpture, woodwork, ceramics, and other arts. One of the most remarkable of these traditions is that of Gagaku, the music of the Japanese Imperial Court. Unlike Western notation, Gagaku is a tablature system in which each of the instruments has a separate notation, with each symbol representing a finger position on the instrument. Today, we are proud to be joined by Robert Garfias, a distinguished ethnomusicologist, to learn more about a particular Gagaku manuscript now on display at the Fowler in communication systems in a global context. He will discuss the notation for the show, a bamboo mouth organ with 17 pipes. Robert Garfias studied at the San Francisco State University and then completed his graduate work at UCLA in ethnomusicology. He went on to teach at and direct the graduate program in ethnomusicology at the University of Washington. Garfias served as dean at UC Irvine for 6 years, as well as professor of anthropology. He was a presidential appointee to the National Council on the Arts and a member of the Council of the Smithsonian Institution. In May 2005, in recognition of his life's work, he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun by the Emperor of Japan, one of the highest honors bestowed on any non-Japanese citizen. Before we get going, I have a few quick technical bits of housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click view options at the top of your screen and select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, that's all from me. Over to you, Robert.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Garfias, and I think probably for many of you, that music you just heard is maybe the first time you've ever heard anything like that, and I think most of you found it pretty strange. I used to tell my students when I was teaching, as I did for many, many years, remember the music you're listening to was created in a different culture with a different history, so of course it's going to be different. It's not going to be like the kind of pop music you expect. To me, that sound is very nostalgic. It represents years. It's not the only music in the world I study, but I did spend a long, long time there and in Japan, and had a great time and a lot of experiences. I don't know whether I was learning about Japan or growing up. I was in my 20s at the time. It was a long, long time ago. But in any case, here's my name once more. And what I am is an ethnomusicologist, in case you've never heard about it, somebody who goes around the world and studies music in its cultural context. And it also means learning different languages and collecting recipes and textiles and all kinds of things. The manuscript we are talking about today is one that I contributed to the museum, and they chose it. Why? I thought it was a very interesting and fortuitous choice to pick this thing out to display, because it is actually a very interesting Robert, and important manuscript. Yes.
Can you put on your share screen to share your slides with everybody?
Oh, sorry, I did. Did I miss that step? You're right. Okay. So, okay, I'm sorry, the public at large has been denied. Come on. And my buttons aren't working very well. Is that sharing now? Is it showing?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back to there. Yeah, and so this is the manuscript we were talking about. I picked it up, I think, in the 50s. There's an area around Tokyo called, actually part of Tokyo, Kanda, and the Jimbotro section of Kanda is old bookstores, hundreds of them. It looks pretty nice now, but back in the 50s, it was a little bit shabby. It was just door to door, little open bookstores with stands and all different kinds of old books, manuscripts primarily. And there were one or two that specialized in music. I came across this, and since I was in Japan at the time for the purpose of studying Gagaku, Japanese court music, I recognized this as a Gagaku manuscript and as a manuscript for notation for the sho, which is that bamboo instrument. This is what the cover looks like. It's not leather, as it says in the museum tag. It's actually paper. And then if you open it, inside, this is the first page, but this little thing here on the right of the screen shows the book seller's tag, and it says Hosho notation, Hoshofu, or the phoenix sho, as the instrument is often called. The phoenix, like the phoenix bird, and notation. It says here that it's 4 volumes. I only got 1, so I just realized that now. I wonder how I dealt with that. I didn't know there was 4 volumes. I bought 1, and I paid 2,500 yen, as it says there, which is about $12 at the time. It's now about $25 or $26, something like that. Worth a lot more, certainly. Would sell for a lot more if it were for sale now, but it was an old used book. It took me a while to figure out. I quickly knew that it was a notation for the sho, also called hosho, phoenix sho, an instrument of the Gagaku ensemble. Here's the Gagaku ensemble, I think, as I last saw it when I was a student in the 50s. I mean, I could tell you, I know the names of each one of these people playing there. You see there are 3 in the front row, 3 percussion instruments, and then on the right and left there's 2 kinds of string instruments, a lute on one side and the zither on the other. And then in the back are 3 each of wind instruments, the flute players on the right and the shiriki double reed on the left, and then on the far left are the or the far right, as you're looking at it, are the sho players, the mouth organ, and there's 3 of them. And that's the typical ensemble. That's the music you were hearing previously. Here they are when they're playing outdoors, accompanying a dance. They were different kind of costume, different roles, the same instruments. You see the sho, the mouth organ in the foreground. And here they are playing inside of Meiji Shrine, one of the big shrines right in Tokyo, accompanying dance with different colorful costumes. Here is a picture of the dance being performed inside the Imperial Palace Music Department. It's still there, and that's where they still perform. They raise out this dance platform in the middle, and they cover it with a silk damask green. And then the costumes are beautiful. Each of the costumes is very elaborate. And I think nowadays, if they tried to replace them, they probably would cost $200,000 to $350,000 each. And you have sets of 4 as well as solo pieces. One little thing I'd like to point out, it's very interesting. This is back in 1958, 59, I think, that I took this picture. And if you look at the audience, almost all the ladies are wearing kimono. There's one lady there I see spot who's wearing Western dress. But in those days, in the 50s, everyone mostly people wore kimono, the women, all the time, every day, everywhere, to the market, down to the corner store, to downtown, to the theater, wherever. And now you almost see no one wearing kimono. So that's a bit of nostalgia there that goes with the times. Here is the hosho, the sho. This is my own instrument, which I contributed. I gave it to the Museum of Musical Instruments in Phoenix. It's a beautiful instrument, 17 pipes, 15 of which have little reeds inside. And if you cover those tiny finger holes, I can't use my mouse here, unfortunately, but I would point it out to you, that you can see little holes on the side of the bamboo. If you cover the hole The reed inside comes into sympathetic relationship with the tube, the length of the tube, and so then it vibrates, otherwise it's silent. The sound is very elegant. Here's how the character is written in Japanese without the phoenix character. Here it is that one of the court musicians, a show player, Bunno Hiroaki it is, and he's sitting here in this beautiful green, the rust-colored robe has vertical green threads that match the damask silk on the ground that he's sitting on. So it's iridescent, it kind of picks up. Just one more touch. Here's the sound of the show alone.
The sound's not coming through very well, Robert. Do you want to try playing it again?
It's not coming at all.
No, we heard it first, and then it kind of cut out. So maybe just try playing it again.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Let's see. It should be transmitted with the program, I guess.
Yep, you're good now.
It's okay? Yeah, all right. So we're gonna, I just want to show that the instrument came with the whole Gagaku orchestra that was originally from Tang, China, and the show was one of the instruments. This is the Tang Chinese version. If you ask the Chinese about it, they will of course say they invented the instrument, but in fact, it really comes from a whole number of different instruments found throughout Southeast Asia. This is a musician I found in northern Thailand near Chiang Mai, and he's Hmong. But it's a calabash resonator, and then they fit the bamboo pipes into it. Very much the same instrument. Anyhow, let's get back to this notation. Very interesting. The more we look at it, the more we learn. It's very beautiful calligraphy. I soon discovered, I didn't realize it at the time I bought it, but I soon discovered, oh, by the way, the word aitake means bamboo pipes, and it's the sound of the combination of 5 or 6 pipes played at once. That's how the show usually plays, 5 or 6 parts in very complicated patterns. Add this harmony sound to the overall ensemble. It adds to the flavor. The one finger goes inside from the right hand, one finger goes inside and plays 2 pipes, and then the thumb plays 2 or 3 pipes on the outside, and the other part of the hand plays the other pipes, whereas the other hand is playing all the other pipes on the other side. Usually 4 or 5 notes at once. Very beautiful. Anyhow, this particular piece, it turns out, composition, the notebook composition, I mean the manuscript, was written out by Ue Chikaaya, who was born in 1851 and died in 1939, overlapping us almost, overlapping me at least by a little bit. That's his name written in Japanese. He happens to be the grandfather of my flute teacher, but he was an excellent calligrapher. And what happened was that everybody started using his notation. They got him to copy. He must have had a little cottage industry, but slow, painstaking work. And he wrote all of this. What you have here in the center of the screen is the title of the piece. On the far right is the remainder of the previous piece. So the piece begins with the writing here, and then in smaller characters, the description of what the piece is, how many beats it has, and the different kinds of rhythmic patterns that are varied. And then the dots on the page represent, in this case, every 4 beats apart, each dot. The big dot is where the large drum hits, and that is a main accent point in the phrase. Each of these characters on the page represents an aitake of 5 or 6 different bamboo pipes played at once. And the piece follows the melody of the main composition, which would be played by the flute and the double reed instrument, the shiriki. So this kind of harmonizes it. Anyhow, his calligraphy became very well known. And I wanted to digress just for a second, but we'll get back to it. The costumes are very elaborate, very beautiful. This is this dark green silk. It has raw threads vertically, and horizontal threads are boiled threads. And so it's stiff and diaphanous, and then they embroider on this. This is embroidery, so they're very complex embroidered patterns. This is more like a damask pattern. The whole color and pattern is woven right into the cloth. This is one they call floating. This is part of a dance costume. The silk floats over the main ground of the cloth, and some of these floating patterns can become very complicated, very rich indeed. This is why they cost so much money for each particular costume. So here is an example of flute notation, but this is a photocopy. Really, there are no printed copies beyond printed editions of Gagaku beyond the easiest beginning pieces. And so I found photocopied old manuscripts, and they all happen to be written by the same Ue Chika Aya. This is notation for the flute. I can actually sing this and play. I could play it. I'm not sure I could play it anymore. I took these books because they were very valuable, and even they were on photographic copies of microfilm. I took them to the Imperial Department of Mausolea and Archives, and they bound them for me. They had damask silk covers and beautiful calligraphy written on the outside, and they put them into these books that were folded books. They carefully pasted them. This is a photocopy of Chika Aya's original manuscript, which I photographed, and they bound them into these beautiful books, which I have also given to the archives. So they're all in there too. And we're not talking about those here, but the old original manuscript. But anyhow, here's the Department of Archives in Mausolea. They are responsible for all the imperial tombs all over Japan, and they keep records. And so, for example, they inform the music department when it's the 50th anniversary of the death of a certain emperor who was buried somewhere in some place, mostly in Kansai, the Nara, Kyoto region of Japan. But many of the musicians have probably in their lifetime never been to this place, and they go there and play and honor the memory of that emperor. But the archives, the Shoryoru, they keep track of all these things. And here's again those beautiful manuscript books. There's my set, that which I have also given to the Ethnomusicology archives, all these bound books. I wanted to let you hear a little bit more of the sound of the combination, of the sound of this music. The front row is the gong, the big drum, and the small drum at the far right. The smallest drum is played by the leader. There you see the mouth organ show in the foreground. The shiriki, the double reed instrument, is very strong and it dominates the sound. This is an 18th century woodblock print of the copy of one of the dancers. This is one of the costumes. Here's a very expensive, elaborate floating silk. It's clouds, and it's only used for one particular dance. Final thoughts here. I just want to say the manuscript, is just a manuscript of music notation, but it happens to be done by a very important calligrapher, and it is now photocopies of this and all of his other manuscripts are now becoming the mainstay for all of the musicians to use. They play from notation only as a memory aid. It took me 3 years in Japan. I learned all of the instruments and the entire repertoire. That is, I went through it once. I can't play it all from memory as they do. They spend years memorizing it and then use the notation only as a reminder of how to play the piece. But the notation is very important. So this particular one that was selected for display is I think important. It's significant that it's won by one of the great calligraphers, and the tradition of this notation now is being used for all of the larger pieces of the court music repertoire, which goes on and on. Incidentally, the Gagaku tradition of Japan is documented teacher to pupil. We can go all the way back to the 7th, 8th century. So this is one of the oldest continuous music traditions in the world. There may be others, but this one is documented. We have the father and son records of teacher to pupil. The notation is almost the same. The music must have changed. We assume as times changed, the interpretation of the notation is different. People put different flavors into it, different ornaments, and play it at different tempos. Sometimes it was slow, sometimes it was fast. But here the notation is kind of the key connection back to the origins of this music. There are no connections that we can find with actual notation examples that exist both in Japan and in China and in Korea too, because the court music tradition exists there. They're all different. They all are slightly variants, but they're many very well connected in many different ways. So there's a lot to pursue in just looking at this single body of manuscript. Thank you. I hope that was interesting and short.
Yes, that was perfect, Robert. Thank you so much. And we have lots of questions, so people
Really?
are definitely engaged, and please feel free to send them through. If you have any questions you haven't submitted yet, we have a little less than 10 minutes for audience question and answer. So
Sorry. Yeah.
let's get right into it. Okay, so we have some about the pentatonic nature of it all. Kylie is asking you to clarify that it's pentatonic, and then also, is it the same as, and perhaps you can explain this to us, DRMSL, or if it's a different type of pentatonic?
It's heptatonic. There are actually 7 tones, but they use 5 at a time and use the alternate tones to change. So if you listen carefully, once in a while, one of the other 2 tones will creep into the melody, add a little spice and nuance, but it's actually technically they're heptatonic systems, 7-tone systems. I didn't understand what the what was it used?
Maybe Kylie can clarify what DRMSL means. If it's pentatonic, I guess that's the 5. We'll let Kylie explain it. We'll move on. Do re mi so la is what it
Well, that's just the solfege system. The Japanese have their own solfege system. As a matter of fact, each instrument has its own solfege system. So the do re mi is really Western music, and something like that exists. But I wouldn't apply the parallel too closely, because for one thing, the tuning system is different. The fundamental tuning system is based on perfect fourths and fifths, which, if you've ever tried to tune a piano, we don't use. We use a very imperfect, highly arbitrary, high mathematical numbers, just so that we can squeeze all 12 tones together and play from one to the other. They're all out of tune, but let's not digress. That's a long, the sound of the perfect natural fourths and fifths is much more beautiful to me anyhow.
Okay, so Mohsen has a question. He says, thank you for this fascinating presentation. And he wonders how old this Japanese notation method is, and to what extent it's comparable to the European notation.
Probably it's a tablature like what was used in the Renaissance, and or certainly before that. Not much for vocal music, but for instruments, the instruments always use the tablature, like they where you put your finger on the keys. But the Japanese notation goes, it's very similar and parallel to the notation system that's used in Korea and in China, and particularly for the court musics. The court music has disappeared in China, but it still exists in Korea very strongly. But there's no particular connection. There's no pieces that are the same. So it's out of the same tradition, but different compositions. So the actual Japanese compositions go back to about probably the earliest one, 7th or 8th century. Although the notation is older and it's used in Japan and China, in Korea, in the same notation system, the particular pieces are probably the oldest, back to the 7th century.
Thank you. Susan wishes that you had longer to speak, and we would love to know more from you since you have so much expertise. And she's wondering if you can confirm that the manuscript on view at the Fowler is really just for the show. And then we have someone else who's asking about, they have a similar book, and they're wondering if they can assume that it's also a music transcript.
Yes, I think the show is, as far as I know, that it's on the manuscript belongs to the Ethnomusicology archives, or was it donated to the Fowler? I'm not sure. It's just on loan to the Fowler, so it's temporary. It's a temporary exhibit. You might have to answer the second question. You might have something that looks like it. The chances that you have precisely a show manuscript are maybe not. It might be, but there, of course, there's koto notation, the 13th string sister. There's biwa, the fourth string lute notation. That's got its own notation, and the flute has its own notation. The ryuteki has its own notation. And then the show, of course, has its own notation. The percussion is not really notated very much, a memorized pattern, but there is a notation system. So there are all these different notation systems. The chance of you having exactly that one may be kind of slight. It also might be a different kind of Japanese music. We'd have to talk about further what makes you think it is actually Gagaku notation as opposed to some other kind of shamisen or koto music or something. Or
I can send you her email address, or this person's email address, and maybe you guys can
pursue that. Thank you. Yeah,
exactly.
I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to help.
So we have some questions about the percussionists and how they are at the front of the Gagaku ensemble. Lena is noting that it's quite different from a Western orchestra where they're at the back, and they're wondering how that affects the sound.
It's a number of things are going on here, and it's very interesting that you asked. There's a little on the far left of the ensemble. There's a guy playing a little gong, a very small gong. That is the youngest member of the group's instrument. And I'll tell you a little aside anecdote. When I was teaching the Gagaku ensemble at UCLA, Frank Gehry, the architect, joined the group. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he was very interested in Gagaku. And so he played the shoko. He played that instrument. The big drum is played by the most senior member of the ensemble, because putting the beat in the right place is more than just bang on the beat. It's very, very subtle, because in the slower tempos, the beat is stretched out and the actual downbeat comes, it's almost delayed to make it more dramatic. And you have to have a very profound knowledge of the entire repertoire to be able to get that final beat in the right place. And next to him on the far right, there's this drum played with two sticks. That is always played by the chief court musician. And he is the senior most and actually controls the whole performance from the playing the drum part, but the speed and so forth. But these people have played so often together that it's almost cohesive. They sort of breathe the music. They feel the changes of tempo, and they just play together as like a breathing, living unit without a conductor.
Wow. I didn't even note the lack of conductor. It's even more impressive.
Well, string quartet doesn't need a conductor. It'd be conductor would be a nuisance. The string quartet is listening carefully and feeling and probably looking, but they're feeling subtle nuances that a conductor probably would only interfere with. That's very gross, beating a beat on top there. So we can get along fine without a conductor. Yeah, we've just gotten used to it.
Okay, so we only have time for one more question. We have people asking if there are new compositions of Gagaku being written nowadays, and kind of jumping off of that, Joseph's wondering if this genre is still popular in Japan today, or if it seems somewhat esoteric.
Pretty esoteric. Most Japanese would say, when I told them, when I went to Japan as a student in the 50s, of course, they'd say, "Are you crazy? You're studying that music?" And then some people with Japanese characters are very complicated. So I said, I'm studying Gagaku. They thought I was studying the study of picture frames. No, it's just another word, but so it is not so usual to hear it, but it's become more so. Now people hear it more and more. There are more good ensembles. It used to be only in the Imperial Palace, and that would be heard only rarely. And now gradually more and more Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples and very good amateur groups are playing this now. So there's a lot more Gagaku than there was in my day, but it's still considered kind of rare. I have the feeling that most Japanese are kind of embarrassed by it. It's so unlike all other kinds of Japanese music that it seems somehow foreign. Interestingly enough, I mean, Western composers of all the different Japanese musics have found this fascinating. Messiaen and Stravinsky. I wish I could tell you my Stravinsky story. He was toward the end of his life very fascinated and wanted me to come and help him with it, but I was a graduate student and I was too embarrassed and shy, and so the world has been deprived of a Stravinsky Gagaku period, which would have been very interesting.
Wow. Wow.
But the other thing is, yes, it is remote. It's not greatly popular by everyone. Oh, about the new compositions. There are a few new compositions, but you know, this happens with many musics, traditional music. Japanese gamelan music, if you know anything about it, is a refined, very refined, elegant music. People write new music, and then in the final analysis, the people who listen to it, who really know the stuff, say, well, it doesn't sound like the old ones because it's not one of the old ones. So it just doesn't do quite the same thing. And unfortunately, people try to do fusion and mix things together, which I'm not against in principle, but it's very hard to get fusion to make it sound as good as either of the originals. So you got to not only do fusion and be clever, but you have to be genius in order to make something really significant. It does work, but it's very hard to do. So yeah, unfortunately, it is a music that was of a time, and still that time exists in Japan. Within the Imperial Palace, there are many ceremonies, and in all the Shinto shrines and temples where the music is required, it still has a life, but it's not part of the mainstream. You're more likely to go to Japan and hear Mozart or Beethoven than Gagaku.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Robert, and sharing your extensive knowledge with us. It was just such an honor to learn from you today.
Thank you. It's very nice to come out of hiding and talk to people, although I couldn't see anybody, but thank you.
And thanks to everyone who joined us. This program has been recorded and it will be available immediately on the Fowler's website. On the Fowler's Facebook. And in a few days, it will be uploaded to our Instagram and onto our website for everyone to revisit and share as you wish. And we hope that you'll join us again for our next program on Thursday. You can find details on the closing slide. In the meantime, have a great week, everyone. See you next time. Bye.